So the GCYL, or Global Citizen Youth Leadership Program, goal is to take youth from Saskatchewan to other third world countries to become better active global citizens and youth leaders within their own communities, and to also better understand international development and our country's interactions with other countries within our world.
The first thing that we did at orientation was figure out our own cultural eye, and that helped place us in who we are as Canadians.
We had a speaker come in and he talked about how racism is in the air we breathe, and that how we have to unlearn what we've been taught before we even knew we were being taught it.
We had people come and talk to us about HIV and AIDS in Canada and the difference between Canada and El Salvador. I really enjoyed the way that we learned the things that we learned. It was discussion-based, it wasn't scary to ask questions, and the people teaching us were so knowledgeable, so it was so easy to learn from them, and it was so easy to also feel passionate about what they were talking about.
We're 8 youth, including me, who are going down to El Salvador for 2 weeks to learn about developmental work.
Unlike most volunteer trips where we're actually going down to El Salvador, we get to learn how to make a difference without being complete tourists. So we're going down, we're billing it out to families, and we get to stay with families and host families, which is going to be really a good experience. Workshops where we've learned about HIV, LGBTQ, First Nations, and Indigenous way of life, as well as racism and oppression. And we're learning this so as we go down there we have a broader understanding and a wider spectrum of what we can base our knowledge off of.
I want to become a better leader. I hope it kind of sparks my interest in activism and things like that, and gives me the resources to apply this in Canada and in other places of the world if I ever get the chance to.
Alright, so it's now 3 o'clock in the morning. We just got to our hostel from the airport after 2 hours in security waiting to get through customs after being a long 24-hour day journey from Regina to Calgary to Houston. Now here. I'm tired, let me sleep.
It's the first day in El Salvador. We're extremely tired as most of us only got 3 hours of sleep. We're off to visit a youth group.
Anna Days is the New Dawn Association of El Salvador, and they're partnered with the Mennonite Central Committee.
And what they've done is started an organization that plans activities and meetings to keep the young youth of El Salvador off the streets and out of the gangs.
Yeah, for example, one team member, Vladdy, he is right there, and now he is working. Actually, he is learning how to fix cars. And it is nice because, he is 13 years old? And it is nice because, the first thing is because he likes that, and the other thing is because he wants to help his family.
Anyone who owns their own business is in constant danger of either death or losing all their money because of the fear and the power the gangs have over everybody and everything.
We have a war between the cops and the gangs members, because whenever a car from the police goes to a specific place, the gangs members, they start shooting to the police. It is damn.
We went to see the indigenous tribe of Azelco in San Salvador. So when we got off the bus at the Azelco's community, we were presented by their chief and other social members of the hierarchy that they have there. They had this really awesome greeting where they lit their medicines and their smudge, and we all smudged. We walked with them to their main square where other community members welcomed us, and we learned how the youth there are retaining their language and knowledge of their history, because in 1930 there was a massacre which killed thousands of their Indigenous, and people now are really shy to claim themselves as Indigenous, and now they're becoming more prideful of being Indigenous. I was inspired by the Indigenous youth of Baselco because it's the youth that are taking the part of retaining their history, and being in Baselco and seeing that they really want to learn their language and history really helps me open my eyes and wanting to do it too.
Oscar Romero was the Archbishop of El Salvador, came into power after his friend had been assassinated while in power by the government. He became an advocate for social change and with the people there, and he became a people's person. He would go into the communities and spend lots of time talking to the people that he served, advocating through his homilies that he would record every night, broadcasting what everybody referred to as their news, that he would notify everybody of what was going on and how it was affecting. He was asked to do a service on Monday for a friend of his as a memorial, and the nuns kept telling him not to, that it was a bad idea. And during the service, what they described as a Volkswagen van drove up, turned around, came down, and a sharpshooter shot him through the heart in the beginning of the service, directly in front of the church.
So then we went down to the basement where Oscar Romero's body is, and it's a very quiet space. Based on what I've heard about him and what we've been told about him, he doesn't seem like the type of person who wants to be in the most beautiful place. He wants to be with the people, and there he's by himself in a place surrounded by riches, and that's not how he lived his life. That's how he is after he's died, and it just seemed really weird, but it is very beautiful and very meaningful for him to be recognized in such a way. SEIC is partnered with Presbyterian World Service and Development, who have an El Salvadorian partner called the Institute for Women's Research, Training and Development, or IMU. And we met with a couple groups that they have to sort of promote discussion about sexuality and sort of the work that those groups are doing within their own communities.
Nosotros trabajamos con grupos de jóvenes con grupos de jóvenes en zonas, en centros escolares y zonas como aquí. Rurales.
We work with youth groups in schools and rural communities.
We talked a lot about what sexuality means to them and sort of how they have sort of not been taught about that, and the circumstances that are here that have sort of prevented them from learning about sexuality and sexual health based around their culture and their religion. And they mentioned how it was their parents and older people in their community they won't talk about it. It's like a very taboo subject that nobody wants to talk about, and so they're not learning what they need to know in order to be healthy, I guess.
We're just leaving the IMU Center and we're on our way to Santa Marta.
In Santa Marta, there was many times where the government would come in and they would massacre everybody that came in their way, burn down everything that stood in their path, trying to impose both fear and remove the guerrillas from Santa Marta. The community of Santa Marta faces poverty, the effects of war wounded, some with post-traumatic stress disorder and other mental illnesses that are causing them to struggle with depression or addiction.
So we've just arrived in Santa Marta, and I guess first impressions, it's really really shocking. I guess just the conditions that people are living in their homes and stuff like that. And the roads, they're really bumpy, a lot of rocks and broken concrete. But yeah, I'm excited to see where I'm staying and where I'll be for the rest of the 2 weeks. So.
After talking to many people in our community, I think it is so great that our group is just here to learn the culture, talk to organizations, and just be immersed into the culture, as all other groups seem to come here with a mission to build something. I think for us, before we start telling them what they need, we need to just analyze and learn their culture and learn their way of living.
COCOC, or the Committee Against AIDS in English, works within the district of Cabañas to do a multitude of programs. They work with prevention, education, accompaniment, and social and political advocacy. So they have lots of programs that they run within different communities within the district. For example, prevention and treatment for HIV/AIDS, gender justice, so talking about men in the gender process, advocating for women's rights and gender-based violence, the gender spectrum, just all of the different social and political issues that are occurring within many different parts of El Salvador, but particularly in their districts. I wanted to know if you have seen a decline in HIV/AIDS cases since you began COCOC.
La reducción, pero al final es algo muy positivo para el país.
And the National AIDS Program here in El Salvador is saying, although it is a small reduction of people who are being newly infected, it is something. We are seeing some changes.
We're on our way to play soccer against COCOC.
Their main objective really is to just help people living with AIDS. Do a lot of preventative work, getting more people knowing about what HIV and AIDS really are, and also giving that support to the people living with HIV, because there's quite a few.
Canadian, one man Canadian, see?
Oh,
here,
yeah.
more or less.
Yeah.
And
instead of worrying about the language barrier, we could just play with actions and games and not be worrying about our Spanish.
Sure, we can't talk and we can't communicate saying pass the ball or anything, but as long as you know how to play the sport, people are people no matter where you come from. It's something I'm gonna carry with me for the rest of my life.
Today we're putting on a workshop for the COCOC on Canadian identity, Canadian diversity, Canadian culture, and Canadian struggles. Basically, we just talked about Canada and our experiences with it. We each spoke about one or two topics. There was agriculture, our ecosystems and animals, our sports, how we're this mosaic of people, how we can each have our own identities but still be one whole thing. There's a lot of similarities that the people of Santa Marta deal with as well, or that they can relate to. We talked about LGBTQ rights and how LGBTQ people can be discriminated against and kind of the laws we have in Canada about them. We talked about Canada's history and residential schools. And the people of COCOC seem to have a lot of questions about residential schools, and they seemed very interested in that. We talked about the stigma that Canada has behind mental illnesses the stigma behind homelessness. We talked about poverty in Canada and how poverty is hid from us in a way so that we think it doesn't even exist. We also played a game of sorts about the gender spectrum. So on one end there was yes, on the other end of the line there was no, and in the middle there was maybe. So Stephanie asked us a bunch of questions. Some of them were, did you play with dolls or cooking toys when you were younger? Have you ever been encouraged to go out and make the family money? Did one of your parents teach you how to cook? And it was really interesting to see where the people lined up behind either yes or no or maybe, and to hear some of the stories of the people. For example, there was a question about if your parents encouraged you to play sports, and almost all of the women from Santa Marta, except for one, lined up on no, so that nobody had ever encouraged them to play sports. And when they were asked why they lined up behind no, one of the women said that when she was younger, her parents caught her playing soccer, and she got in so much trouble for it. And that just was shocking to me. They said that only boys played soccer and only boys played sports, and that it wasn't for girls. So that's crazy to me that these women had been so discouraged from playing sports because of the fact that sports are supposed to be a boys' thing.
We're at Radio Victoria and Victoria
Cabañas. Radio Victoria is a radio station that advocates for human rights, and we're about to go and speak on the air very briefly to say hi.
Another thing that COCOC focuses on is social and political advocacy. COCOC has radio spots on the radio that let people know the things that COCOC is doing in the communities and how people can get involved with COCOC and with everything that they're doing.
In 2006, a mining company that used to be owned in Canada, Pacific Rim, they came down to create a gold mine here, Radio Victoria. They were originally offered $8,000 a month to speak about this gold mine and give it good publicity. But what Radio Victoria did instead is they went in and researched what the mine would actually do, and what they learned, they then broadcasted throughout the radio station. And everybody in the radio station started receiving death threats for them and their families, threats to move out, all these different threats. And there was 3 people murdered, and there was never any charges laid on them, but the person who was the representative here in El Salvador was then charged a few years later for a crime in San Salvador where he murdered somebody and then severed their limbs and spread them all across. So
that's scary. That a Canadian company was doing this to the people there. We are not the peacekeepers all the time, and that whole idea that we've had about Canada for so long is changing, and not for the better.
we'd like to thank you, Radio Victoria, for this opportunity having us on the air, as well as thank COCOC for supporting us throughout these past 2 weeks. Just around Santa Marta here, we went on a walk and we got to see the guerrilla training grounds and the different training apparatuses. So there was berms and trenches. Then there was also 2 large craters from 500-pound bombs that were about 8 to 10 feet deep and between 20 to 30 feet in diameter. And there was 2 of them side by side, separated by maybe 10, 20 feet. There wasn't much room in between. And then right next to them were remains of what was where there once stood a house. And we got to see what they called family tunnels, which are holes not much bigger than the underneath of a bed, or the holes we dig in snowbanks back in Canada. And that's where they would go for shelter during the war to avoid the soldiers and the bombs.
Y el ejército no pudieron encontrar tierra fresca que ha sido excavada.
And so people would come in with a little rubber dishes, bowls, huacales, and they bring a spoon and they come in little by little and they take a little bit of dirt out and they would take it to the river or the creek and throw it in so that it would wash away, because when the armed forces came in here they wouldn't see it, they wouldn't see signs of tunnels being built.
And then they had hospitals underground in tunnels, and then they said there was someone that was in there, I believe it was 45 or 48 days underground being treated and recovering. and he didn't know where he was because they would blindfold him to get him there and blindfold him leaving. Just recently, when they uncovered this hospital, he was able to say, yeah, I was there. And in that one, there was military pants hanging, there was hammocks and supplies that were in there before. There's a lot here that I didn't think I would relate to, and now I'm here relating to it, and it's scary. Emotionally, it's starting to add up and take its toll.
So right now we are in a community called El Mazote, and we are taking a tour of some massacre sites from a massacre in the 80s that the government thought that all the peasants here were sort of cooperating with the guerrillas in the community, and so they came in and they massacred everyone. And so we are taking a tour led by the brother of one of the sole survivors of the massacres.
It was the site of the largest massacre during the Civil War here, and there was hundreds and hundreds of names up on the memorial. And as sad as for something that large, you would think that they would have something bigger, but it's a wall with names on it, and they don't have much. There was only one survivor of the massacre out of everybody in that entire community, so they didn't have much to build it on, and they don't have much funding to build a center for people to go and gain more information. But we were told stories of the teenagers being brought out and raped right before they were assassinated, and the only survivor of this massacre had an 8-month-old baby at the time, and she was carrying it, and a soldier smashed her hands with the butt of a rifle, causing her to drop the baby, at which point they picked the baby up, threw it in the air, and caught it on the end of a bayonet, which is inhumane to say the least, but that was what they did for a lot of people, according to the story, and it was hard to deal with that. And losing a kid, she lost all of her kids that day, and she only ended up having one more after the war. She lost all her kids and her husband in that single day.
There were lots of people in this park area that we drove through. As we drove through the park, it was really exciting, it was fun, and when we stopped, you could see the wall of all of the names of the victims of the Civil War, and I think we all sort of snapped into reality a little bit of how significant that place was. It's very easy to look at the names and just sort of pass by and think of them as names on a wall, but I think when you start to realize that each of those names has their own unique story and unique past and history behind them, it becomes so much more complex. It felt disrespectful to walk by a wall and not read the names. I felt like I needed to read all of the names and notice them and sort of to recognize their individual stories and pasts. One of the older women who traveled with us today, she could read some of the names and know who they were. And she's been there quite a few times before, but today was the first time that she found her brother's name. Living somewhere where things are different, it really makes you think about why those things are different or how they're different and what that difference means. Being a global citizen means knowing about the world and knowing about how where you come from fits into the world and fits into everyone else's histories. I need to reevaluate the things in my life that I see as important and that take priority in my life. Should they be important? Why are they important? Why do I prioritize them? It's so normal now in teenage society to take things at face value. We so rarely think about why things are here, how things are here, what do they mean, what impact do they have on you. We so easily accept things and we don't question. If we don't question things, you won't have a say in how anything goes, and if you don't question, you won't learn anything. If you don't question, nobody else will learn anything.
You come here and you realize, wow, I'm very lucky. And then at the same time you feel like you're almost missing something vital the people here have that maybe people in first world countries are missing.
The things that have happened in this place are unimaginably horrible. I've been other places for 2 weeks and I haven't felt as strong as a connection to those places as I have to here. El Salvador will break your heart, but the people will put it back together. And I think in the beginning we all were like, yeah, we've heard the saying, whatever. But I think now that we're at the end, we're all sort of realizing how true that statement is. I think this is one of the first places that I've traveled to that I know that I will come back to.
Sometimes you can make connections with people without talking. There's so much more to relationships than just asking how the weather is.
We had some pretty special moments despite the lack of being able to speak Spanish or English. And
definitely feel like international development is something that should be more frequently discussed in the schools and just in everyday life, really.
Living in El Salvador for 2 weeks makes you realize that how much of a smaller footprint we could be making if we just figured out what's more important in life, and being a minimalist and just trying to take only what we need from the earth and trying to leave something behind in return so that we have enough for future generations, which is, I think, what the Salvadorians are really grasping a lot better than what we are.
But this trip was the first educational trip I went on, and what I came back with wasn't just the relationships, but so much knowledge that I can continue to share and keep with me. There's so much you can do even when you're young, and so many opportunities to make that change.
I've been cutting down my water usage. I've already started doing that. I've been reusing plastic bags, and I currently have in my room, I've gone and found all my shopping bags or fabric bags and using those instead of plastic bags to help reduce. I've been more conscious of where my food's coming from, where my clothing's coming from, where what I'm buying is coming from, and what effect it's having on a global scale. For long-term things that we can do is finding ways to better educate people on issues around global citizenship, with an example of our speaking tour this fall. Or another thing we could do would be starting a way to help organizations around the world like COCOC that are having trouble with budget cuts because people and governments are deciding that they shouldn't be supporting these issues, when you go down to these countries and you see these issues, you realize that the government shouldn't just be supporting it, but the government should be down there helping.
So I guess I learned to accept that Canada has its flaws and its upsides, and so does every place. It's not. Yeah, I think we should teach each other instead of just one preaching to the other one pretty much about what they should be doing. we should learn from each other's mistakes, I guess.
The next thing that I need to do is for me to take what I've learned and tell it to other people.